Hey, my name is Lucas Bennett. I'm 24 and I live in a small apartment in Denver, Colorado. I work as a freelance web designer, mostly building clean, simple websites for local coffee shops, bakeries, yoga studios, and small retail stores. My days are quiet. Just me, my laptop, too much coffee, and the occasional all-nighter fixing bugs that refuse to die before sunrise. I'm not the adventurous type. I like routines. I like knowing what comes next. That's probably why my best friend Jake Morrison has always been such a force in my life. Jake is the complete opposite of me. Loud where I'm quiet, restless where I'm steady. He's the kind of guy who texts you at midnight saying, "Pack a bag, we're leaving in an hour," and actually expects you to show up. That's exactly how the Aspen trip started. It was a Thursday night when Jake called me. "Lucas, you're coming to Aspen with me this weekend." I was already in bed staring at my laptop screen. "No thanks." "You're coming," he said, like it was already decided. "My mom's going too. She needs to get out of the house for a bit." That made me pause. Jake's mom, Clara Morrison, had been a quiet but steady presence in my life since high school. She wasn't like other parents. She didn't hover or ask too many questions. She watched. She noticed things. After her divorce a few years ago, she left her corporate marketing job and opened a small studio where she made handmade candles, crafted home decor, and took product photos for other small businesses. She always had a camera with her. I'd seen her work a few times. Quiet, beautiful shots of morning light on snow, smoke curling from cabin chimneys. Ordinary things that looked almost sacred through her lens. I respected her, maybe more than I ever admitted out loud. "Fine," I said, "but I'm not skiing the Black Diamonds with you." Jake laughed. "Deal, see you Friday morning." We arrived in Aspen just before sunset on Friday. The lodge sat tucked between tall pine trees, its roof heavy with fresh snow. Inside it smelled like wood smoke and pine. There was a big stone fireplace, old leather couches, and the kind of quiet that only exists in the mountains. The next morning, Jake dragged me out to the slopes right after breakfast. I was terrible on skis. He spent half the morning laughing at me while I tried not to faceplant into the powder. Clara didn't join us. She told Jake she wanted to hike one of the shorter trails behind the lodge to take some winter photos for a new collection she was working on. "You sure you want to go alone?" Jake asked her. Clara lifted her camera like it was the most obvious answer in the world. "I'm 43, not 4. I'll be back before lunch." The sky was still clear then. The snow was light and gentle. Everything felt peaceful. We skied for a little over an hour before stopping near one of the resort's rest stations. That's when the wind changed. It happened fast. One minute the sun was out, the next the sky turned a heavy, bruised gray. An employee from the resort came running over, shouting that a snowstorm was moving in quicker than expected, and everyone needed to head back to the lodge immediately. Jake tried calling his mom. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. His face changed. I'd never seen him look scared before. "She went up the north trail," he said, pointing toward the dense pine forest behind the lodge, the one with the overlook. We rushed back and asked the staff. One of the older guys remembered seeing Clara heading up that trail about an hour earlier with her camera. She hadn't come back yet. The wind was already howling. Snow was falling thick and fast. The resort said they'd notify search and rescue, but the storm was too strong for helicopters, and the ground team would take time to assemble. Jake looked at me, eyes wide. "I'm going to find her." I grabbed his arm. "Running around in a blizzard is suicide, Jake." "That's my mom, Lucas." I knew there was no stopping him. So we made a quick plan. We'd split up near the trailhead and cover the most likely areas without going too far from the marked paths. Jake would take the main trail. I would check the smaller side path that branched off near a cluster of trees, the one the staff member thought Clara might have taken for better shots. Before we split, Jake grabbed my jacket and pulled me close. "If you find her, call me right away." I nodded. Then I turned and walked into the white. The forest was already disappearing under layers of snow. My phone had almost no signal. I kept calling her name anyway, my voice getting swallowed by the wind. Every step felt heavier. The cold bit through my gloves. My lungs burned. I'd only known Clara as Jake's mom, the quiet woman who made amazing coffee when we were teenagers, and never made me feel like an inconvenience when I stayed over. But right now, in the middle of this storm, she wasn't just Jake's mom anymore. She was someone I needed to find. And as I pushed deeper into the trees, following the faint line of what used to be a trail, I had a sinking feeling in my chest. The trail markers were almost completely buried. I could barely see more than 10 feet in front of me. The wind had turned vicious, whipping snow into my face like tiny needles. My phone kept losing signal every few seconds, but I kept calling anyway. Clara! My voice disappeared into the white. No answer. Just the roar of the wind and the creaking of pine branches heavy with snow. I pushed forward, one step at a time, squinting through the storm. My legs were already burning. I had no idea how long I'd been walking. 20 minutes? 30? Time felt warped out here. Then I saw it. A single set of footprints veering off the main trail heading toward a small slope between two clusters of trees. Beside the prints was a long, deep slide mark, like someone had lost their footing and slid down the incline. My heart slammed against my ribs. I followed the marks down the slope, half sliding myself. At the bottom, caught on a low branch, was a flash of red. Clara's scarf. I ripped it free and shouted her name again, louder this time. Clara! This time there was an answer, weak, barely audible over the wind. Lucas? I ran. She was sitting with her back against a thick pine trunk, one leg stretched out awkwardly in front of her. Snow covered her shoulders and the front of her jacket. Her right ankle was already swollen inside her boot. She still had her camera strap around her neck, one gloved hand gripping it like she refused to let go even now. I dropped to my knees in front of her. Are you hurt? Did you break anything? She tried to smile, but her lips were too pale and her teeth were chattering too hard. If I broke something, I'm going to be very annoyed, she said, voice thin. I still haven't gotten a single decent shot today. Even now she was trying to joke. I checked her ankle as gently as I could. It was bad. Swollen and already turning colors. No way she could walk on it, let alone hike back through the storm. I pulled out my phone and tried Jake first. No signal. Then emergency services? Nothing. The storm was getting worse by the minute. Visibility was dropping fast. If I tried to drag her back to the main trail right now, we'd both end up lost, or worse. Clara looked at me through the snow clinging to her eyelashes. Lucas, you need to go back and get help. I shook my head. I'm not leaving you here. You can't carry me that far. Then we find somewhere to wait it out. I remembered the old wooden sign I'd passed earlier on the trail. It had been half covered in snow, but I was sure it said, Emergency Shelter, 0.6 mile, with an arrow pointing deeper into the trees. I didn't know if the shelter was still standing, or if it was even stocked, but right now it was the only chance we had. I helped her up. She bit down hard on her bottom lip when she tried to put weight on her right foot, but she didn't make a sound. I wrapped one of her arms around my shoulders and started moving. It was brutal. Every step was a fight. The wind kept trying to knock us over. Snow piled up faster than we could walk. Clara slipped twice and we both went down. The second time, she stayed on the ground for a few seconds longer, breathing hard. I can't, she said quietly. Lucas, I really can't. I crouched in front of her, snow already gathering on my jacket. Just a little more, I said. We're close, I promise. I wasn't sure if that was true, but I said it anyway. We kept going. I ended up half carrying, half dragging her for what felt like forever. My arms were shaking. My lungs felt like they were full of ice, but I didn't stop. Then, through the swirling white, I saw it. A small, dark shape between two tall pines. Low, wooden roof. No lights, no smoke. Just a tiny emergency shelter that looked like it hadn't been used in years. I half-carried Clara the last 20 yards and used my shoulder to shove the door open. It was blocked halfway with snow. It took 3 hard pushes before the door finally gave way with a groan. Inside it was dark, freezing, and smelled like old wood and dust. But it was dry. And right now, dry meant survival. The shelter was barely big enough for 2 people. One narrow wooden bed pushed against the back wall, a couple of old wool blankets that smelled like dust and pine, a dented metal first aid kit, and a small cast iron stove in the corner with just enough dry firewood stacked beside it to last the night if we were careful. I helped Clara sit on the edge of the bed. She was shaking so badly her whole body trembled. I knelt in front of her and carefully unlaced her right boot. Her ankle was already twice its normal size, the skin around it turning an ugly purple. She hissed through her teeth when I touched it but didn't pull away. "Sorry," I muttered. "It's fine," she said, voice thin. "Just do what you have to." I wrapped it as best I could with the elastic bandage from the first aid kit, then helped her out of her wet jacket. Her sweater underneath was damp at the shoulders and sleeves. I hung both pieces near the stove to dry. The fire was weak at first. My hands were so cold I dropped the matches twice before I finally got one lit. The newspaper caught, then the kindling, and slowly the small stove began to glow. The orange light pushed back the darkness just enough to see each other's faces. Clara watched the flames like they were the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. I found 2 cans of chicken soup in a dusty metal box on the shelf. I opened them with my pocket knife, poured them into the small pot that came with the stove, and set it on top to heat. The smell that filled the tiny room was the most comforting thing I'd smelled all day. We ate in silence, passing the pot back and forth, each taking a few spoonfuls. It wasn't much, but it was hot, and that mattered more than taste right now. After we finished, the cold started creeping back in. The walls were thin. The wind outside screamed like it was angry we'd found shelter. Clara's teeth started chattering again. Her lips had gone pale. I took off my own jacket and draped it over her shoulders without asking. "Lucas, no," she said immediately. "You'll freeze." "I'm fine." "You're not." I sat down on the bed beside her and pulled the largest blanket over both of us. Then I turned to her and said the words that had been sitting in my chest since we walked through that door. "We need to keep each other warm." Clara went very still. For a second, I thought she might argue. Instead, she looked at me with those quiet, tired eyes and slowly nodded. I shifted closer until our shoulders touched. I could feel how cold she was, even through the layers. After a moment, I lifted my arm and settled it around her back, pulling her gently against my side. She was rigid at first, her whole body tense like she wasn't used to being held by anyone. But little by little, the tension left her. She leaned into me. Her head came to rest against my shoulder. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the only sound was our breathing and the occasional pop of burning wood. "I'm sorry," Clara said after a long time. Her voice was so soft I almost missed it. "For what?" "For getting you stuck here with me." I shook my head. "I chose to come looking for you." She was quiet for a while. Then she spoke again, and this time the words came slower, like she was pulling them out from somewhere deep. After the divorce, I told myself I had to be strong for Jake. He was only 17. He needed one parent who wasn't falling apart. So I became that parent. I smiled, I worked, I built the studio. I took care of everything by myself. I got so good at it that eventually even I started believing I didn't need anyone. She let out a shaky breath. But some nights it's just too quiet in that house. I tightened my arm around her slightly. "Do you need anyone?" I asked. Clara didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "Tonight I do." Something in my chest shifted. I looked down at her. The firelight painted soft shadows across her face. Her hair was still damp at the ends, strands sticking to her cheek. Without thinking, I reached up and gently brushed them away with my thumb. She didn't flinch. She just looked up at me. We were very close now. Close enough that I could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes. Close enough to notice how her breathing had changed. The air between us felt heavy, charged with something neither of us was ready to name. I didn't kiss her, I didn't even lean in, but I knew in that moment that something between us had already crossed a line we couldn't uncross. Clara rested her head back on my shoulder. Her hand found mine under the blanket and held on. Not tightly, just enough. We stayed like that for hours. Sometimes we talked. Quiet, scattered conversations about nothing important. Other times we just sat in silence, listening to the storm and the fire. At some point her shivering stopped. Her body grew heavier against mine, her breathing deepened. She had fallen asleep. I stayed awake, I kept the fire going with the last of the wood. I kept my arm around her. I watched the way the light moved across her face and thought about how strange it was that the person I was holding right now was the same woman who used to make us pancakes on Sunday mornings when Jake and I were in high school, except she wasn't just Jake's mom anymore. She was Clara. And somewhere between the moment I found her in the snow and right now, with her asleep on my shoulder in a tiny shelter in the middle of a blizzard, I had started to feel things I had no business feeling. I looked at the red scarf hanging near the stove, slowly drying in the heat. Tomorrow the storm would pass. Search and rescue would find us. We would go back to our normal lives in Denver. Jake would still be my best friend. Clara would still be his mother. But I already knew that nothing was going to feel normal again. Not for me, not after tonight. I don't remember falling asleep. One minute I was staring at the dying fire, the next, I was being shaken awake by bright morning light and the sound of voices outside. The door burst open. 3 people in bright orange rescue jackets stepped inside, snow still clinging to their gear. Behind them came Jake. He pushed past everyone and dropped to his knees in front of his mother. "Mom!" he said, voice cracking. "Jesus, Mom!" Clara stirred against my shoulder. She blinked slowly, then reached out and touched Jake's face like she needed to make sure he was real. "I'm okay, baby," she whispered. "I'm okay." Jake pulled her into a tight hug, careful of her ankle. Over her shoulder, his eyes found mine. He didn't say anything at first. Then he stood up, walked over, and wrapped his arms around me so hard I could barely breathe. "Lucas," he said into my jacket, "I owe you my fucking life, man." I patted his back awkwardly. "You don't owe me anything." When Jake turned back to his mom, Clara looked at me over his shoulder, just for a second. Her eyes were tired, but there was something else in them now. Something soft and uncertain and a little scared. It hit me right in the chest. We were airlifted out an hour later. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a bright, blinding world of fresh snow. At the lodge, everything was chaos in the best way. Staff kept apologizing. Other guests kept asking if we were all right. Someone even brought us hot chocolate that tasted like heaven. Jake kept repeating the story to anyone who would listen. How I went out alone in the blizzard and found his mom. People started calling me a hero. I hated it. I wasn't a hero. I was just a guy who couldn't stand the thought of Clara being out there alone. Before we left Aspen that afternoon, Clara pulled me aside near the parking lot while Jake was loading the car. She was using a pair of crutches one of the staff had lent her. Her ankle was in a proper brace now. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the red scarf. It was dry and warm from being near the heater all morning. "Take it," she said quietly. I shook my head. "It's yours. You need it more than I do right now." She pressed it into my hands. "Consider it a thank you." Her fingers brushed mine when she let go. Neither of us moved for a second. "Clara, don't," she said gently. "Not yet." I nodded. I understood. Jake was only 20 feet away. The drive back to Denver was quiet. Jake talked the whole way, filling the silence with nervous energy. Clara mostly stared out the window. I sat in the back, the red scarf folded on my lap, and tried not to think about how different everything already felt. 2 weeks passed. Life tried to go back to normal. I went back to my apartment, back to my laptop, back to fixing websites and drinking too much coffee. Jake still texted me stupid memes and invited me over to watch games. Clara still existed in the background of our friendship like she always had. Except she didn't. Not anymore. The messages started small. "Did you make it home okay?" Then a little more. "My ankle is finally starting to feel normal again. Thank you for wrapping it so well." Then they became something else. She sent me photos from that day, shots she'd taken before the storm hit. One of them was the trail we'd been on, with 2 tiny figures in the distance that I realized were me and Jake. I hadn't even known she was taking pictures of us. I replied, "You still managed to take beautiful photos right before getting lost." She answered almost immediately, "Some things are more dangerous the more you think about them." I read that message at least 10 times. We started talking about work. She asked if I could help redesign the website for her studio. I said yes without thinking. We spent 3 evenings video calling while I showed her different layouts. She had good taste. She noticed small details most people missed. Every time she smiled at something I showed her, I felt it in my stomach. The red scarf never left my desk chair. Some nights, when the apartment felt too quiet, I'd wrap it around my neck and sit on the couch with the lights off. It still smelled faintly like her, something soft and warm and little like vanilla. I told myself I was being ridiculous. She was Jake's mom. I was his best friend. Whatever happened in that shelter was survival, nothing more. But the more I tried to convince myself, the worse it got. It all came to a head on a Sunday afternoon. Jake came over to watch the Broncos game. We were sitting on my couch, beers on the coffee table, when his eyes landed on the chair behind my desk. He went quiet. "Is that my mom's scarf?" I froze with the beer halfway to my mouth. "Yeah," I said after a second. "She gave it to me before we left Aspen. I keep forgetting to give it back." Jake stared at it for a long moment. Then he looked at me. Really looked at me. "My mom's been asking about you a lot lately," he said. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. Jake leaned back against the couch cushions. He didn't look angry. He just looked tired. Older than 24. "I'm not stupid, Lucas," he said quietly. "I saw the way she looked at you when they pulled us out of that shelter. And I've seen the way you've been acting since we got back." My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. Jake continued, voice low. "I just need to know one thing. Are you looking at her like she's some kind of passing thing? Because if you are, you need to stop. Right now. She's been through enough shit in her life. She doesn't need someone making her feel unwanted again." I set my beer down with shaking hands. "I'm not," I said. "I'm not looking at her like that." Jake studied my face for a long time. Then he nodded once, slow and heavy. "Good," he said. "Because if you hurt her, Lucas, I don't think I'll be able to forgive you." He turned back to the TV like the conversation was over, but the weight of it stayed in the room with us for the rest of the afternoon. That night after Jake left, I sat alone in my apartment with the red scarf in my hands and finally admitted the truth I'd been running from since Aspen. I wasn't just thinking about Clara. I was falling for her, and I had no idea what the hell I was supposed to do about it. I sat on my couch long after Jake left, the red scarf in my hands. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the fridge. I kept turning the scarf over, running my thumb along the soft fabric, and finally stopped lying to myself. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep pretending that what happened in that shelter was just survival. I couldn't keep replying to Clara's messages like they didn't mean something more. And I sure as hell couldn't keep acting like I wasn't falling for my best friend's mother. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my keys and drove across town. Clara's house sat in a quiet neighborhood on the west side of Denver. The front porch light was on. A few dead plants still sat in their pots from winter. I parked at the curb and sat in the car for almost a full minute, staring at the steering wheel. Then I got out and walked to the door. She opened it wearing a cream-colored sweater and dark jeans, her hair loose around her shoulders. There was a small smudge of wax on her thumb from working in her studio. When she saw me standing there, she didn't look surprised. If anything, she looked like she had been expecting me. "Lucas?" I held up the red scarf. "I came to return this." Clara glanced at the scarf, then back at my face. Her expression softened. "You drove all the way over here just to give me back a scarf?" I swallowed. "No." She didn't move. She just waited, one hand still on the doorframe. I took a breath and said the words I'd been holding in for weeks. "If I keep texting you like nothing happened, I'm going to keep pretending that night in the shelter didn't change anything. And I can't do that anymore." Clara's eyes searched mine. There was caution there, but also something warmer underneath. "Are you sure this isn't just because we were scared that night?" she asked quietly. "Because it was cold and dark and we thought we might not make it?" I shook my head. I've asked myself that every single day since we got back. If it was only that night, it should have faded by now, but it hasn't. Every time you text me, every time I see your name on my phone, I feel like I'm still sitting in that shelter with you. She looked down at the scarf in my hands. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. You're not the only one who feels that way. My chest tightened. Clara stepped back and opened the door wider. Come inside, she said. If we're going to talk about this, we might as well do it somewhere warmer than my front porch. I stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of pine and vanilla from the candles she made. She closed the door behind me, and for a moment we just stood there in the hallway, neither of us sure what came next. We ended up sitting on opposite ends of her couch. The red scarf lay between us like a quiet witness. We talked for a long time. About the divorce. About how alone she'd felt for years. About how I had spent the last 2 weeks trying to convince myself that what I felt for her was wrong. About Jake, and how much we both cared about him. About the fact that this was complicated and messy, and maybe a terrible idea, but also about how neither of us wanted to go back to pretending. At some point, Clara reached over and picked up the scarf. She folded it neatly and placed it on the coffee table. You can keep it, she said, if you want. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since Aspen, I didn't feel like I was doing something wrong. I want to try, I said. Whatever this is, I want to try. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded, slow and careful. So do I. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't make any big declarations or promises about the future. We just sat there on her couch, two people who had survived a storm together and were finally brave enough to admit that the storm had changed them. Outside, the city moved on like nothing had happened. Inside, something new had begun. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. I was exactly where I was supposed to be,